The door flung open and bounced against the wall hard enough to draw the attention of everyone at the party despite the blaring music. I wasn't in the direct sight line of the door, but the bang was loud enough to silence the people talking around me and draw our collective attention to where it came from. "Oh shit!" exclaimed someone in the living room who clearly had an unobstructed view of what was going on. I'm okay, came a familiar voice from the doorway. I rounded the corner and saw that the voice belonged to my friend Chuck. And as far as I could see, there was nothing okay with what was happening. The first thing I saw was a smattering of gore glowing bright red against the dull white door. The entire entryway looked like Jackson Pollock had decorated during its blood period. No pun intended. Chuck stood in the doorway of my friend Roxanne's house, clutching his left wrist with his right hand, doing his best to cap off the tiny geysers of blood erupting through the spaces between his fingers. "What the fuck, Chuck?" I blurted, realizing instantly how hilarious it was that I'd made a rhyme without thinking about it. But now was not the time to point out to people how funny I was. I would, of course, wait until we all got past whatever this thing that was happening was and bring it up casually in conversation. Anyway, like I said, this was not the time. "Okay, man," he said, turning to me. "It's totally cool. I promise you this is not as bad as it looks." "It looks like you're bleeding to death in Roxanne's doorway, dude," I replied. The crowd was starting to gather now as partygoers began to gravitate towards the commotion. As more and more people saw that the doorway had been turned into something from the set of a John Carpenter film, they began to shout things, adding further to the confusion of the situations. "Oh my God, call 911, close the door, get Roxanne, flush the drugs. What the fuck, Chuck?" I repeated my rhyme so the rest of the people who had gathered could hear it and would be able to later relate when I retell the story about how clever I fainted myself to be. Chuck's brother Jack ran up from the darkness of the front yard holding a noticeably dirty souvenir towel they give out for free at baseball games when it's Give Shit Away for Free Day. In his other hand, Jack was holding the neck of a broken bullet bourbon bottle dripping red from its jagged edge. Jack slapped the towel on his brother's arm and started to squeeze while emphatically gesturing with the bottle towards the wound. "Pressure! Pressure!" he shouted. "You gotta put pressure on it!" The towel was not much help in the way of slowing the bleeding. In fact, it looked like the blood was coming faster since Jake started applying this so-called pressure. My friend Roxanne, whose house was currently being turned into a crime scene, rounded the corner, pushing people aside to see what was happening. "What the? Holy shit!" With that, Roxanne turned her head to the side and booted projectile style right into the side of her friend Missy's face. I didn't know that Roxanne was that squeamish when it came to blood. However, the fact that she had been drinking heavily for a few hours might have exacerbated the situation. Missy shrieked, took a long breath, and shrieked again while holding both of her hands in front of her shaking face like they were on fire. A moment later, she clasped both hands over her mouth in the piss-poor attempt to stop the inevitable. Now, I have to say this is where things became slightly difficult for me. I wasn't grossed out or anything like that, but I found myself conflicted over just exactly which disaster to get the lion's share of my attention. On one side of me, a friend of mine was bleeding out while emphatically insisting he's okay. And on the other side was quite possibly the start of a domino effect style puke-orama. People who know me, and I mean really know me well, know that it has always been a childhood dream of mine to witness such a thing. I almost did back in the 7th grade, but the chain reaction was broken before it could get started thanks to Valerie Bonds and her goddamn iron gut. But that's a story for another time. My decision was made for me when Chuck collapsed against his brother, and they both did a header into the shallow end of the ever-growing pool of blood at their feet. My decision was made for me as I lunged forward to help the hapless, bloody brothers back to their feet. From behind me, I heard the distant sound of no less than 5 different vomits, each happening seconds after the last. I dropped Chuck and turned around hoping it wasn't too late, but the pukers had scattered. A multicolored swamp of partially digested snake food swimming in bile and regurgitated cheap booze was all that was left of what may have been my only chance to witness the fabled vomit chain outside of a hacky Adam Sandler flick. What a bummer! Anyway, it was about that time a girl named Lauren, who was also an emergency room nurse, pushed through the small crowd holding some towels and a large glass of water. Without hesitating, she kneeled in the blood puddle, untangled the brothers, and began attending to Chuck's injury. It was also right around then that we could hear sirens, and a moment later, an ambulance jumped the curb and parked on the lawn. The paramedics rushed in, yelling for everyone to back up and give him space. Crestfallen, I headed through the living room toward the backyard, being extra careful not to step in all the puke. I filtered out into the yard with several others, seeking to get out of the way, and slunk off into a dark corner by myself to smoke a joint and reflect. Normally, you would think that something like this would bring any party to a screeching halt for the night, but that's where you'd be wrong. Roxanne was out in the backyard minutes later with a shot in each hand, trying to put the alcohol she'd puked out back in to her system. She took several long pulls off my joint before going back in to deal with the paramedics, as well as all the cops who had just arrived. Turns out, when Chuck was getting out of his brother's car, he dropped the bottle of bourbon from his lap, and in an attempt to catch his lost balance, fell out of the car's passenger side and landed onto the bottle as it broke in the street. He instructively stuck his arm out to try and break his fall, which is how he severed his radial artery, and why he bled like a son of a bitch. They took him off to the hospital, got him stitched up, threw some donor blood into him, and sent him on his way. No worse for the wear. I stayed at the party until the wee morning hours and stopped for greasy breakfast tacos on the way home, as I am wont to do. When I got home and looked in the bag, I discovered that it contained 2 additional tacos that I had neither ordered nor paid for. Bonus tacos. I greedily devoured the food I had ordered, but ate the 2 additional tacos slowly so I could savor their freeness. Shortly thereafter, I passed out on my couch watching Married with Children reruns. As I faded off into my substance-aided slumber, I thought about what had happened at the party. Then I thought about the tacos. I may not have gotten to witness a real live chain reaction puke-a-thon, but I did end up with 2 free tacos. Life sure has a funny way of balancing itself out sometimes. The end.